Hello and welcome to the Publisher Podcast from Media Voices. I'm a slightly gravelly afterthought, but it's October and it's cold season here in the UK, so please excuse my voice. This season, Chris Sutcliffe, Peter Houston and I are exploring the people and products powering publishing, both through the podcast and our adjacent weekly newsletter, which you can sign up to for at voices.media. This season of the Publisher Podcast is sponsored by BlueConic, your all-in-one customer data solution. You can go from data to insights to action with BlueConic's fully integrated customer data operating system. Learn more at BlueConic.com, where data is for doing. So this episode I'm speaking to John Shields, Director of Podcasts at The Economist. They made the bold move last year to put almost all of their podcasts behind a paywall, creating a separate Podcasts Plus subscription option. So a year on from the launch of Podcasts Plus, John and I discussed what drove the decision, some of the risks and opportunities of charging for audio, and most importantly, how the past 12 months has gone. This is a really fascinating chat, and I know there are a lot of other publishers considering charging for their podcasts, so I hope there's plenty of food for thought in here in how The Economist has found the experience. Now, interestingly, no one has followed in their footsteps yet. So I began by asking John what the reasons were for taking their podcasts behind a paywall, and what some of those internal conversations looked like in the run-up to launch last October.
Yeah, I guess it was a bold move. It didn't seem so much like that by the time we got there, because I joined The Economist, I guess, 4 years ago at the same time roughly as our CEO, Lara Burrow. And I remember from the very first conversations I ever had with her were all about we should look at paywalling podcasts. The Economist is a subscriber business. It has been since 1843. And the idea, I think she was very struck when she came into the business, that the idea that we were effectively giving away our best journalism, as podcasts improved in quality and in number, we're giving away our best journalism for free, kind of risks cannibalizing our main business, which is a subscription business. And the reason we made the move a year ago now was twofold, really. We wanted to make sure the quality was really there before paywalling. We wanted to make sure that our podcasts were really as good as they can be. And we had particularly reached a milestone with the launch of The Prince a year before, which was a very successful series, our first narrative series about Xi Jinping. And then the other question was the user experience. So the product team had been looking at that in depth. And, the big worry about paywalling was, is it too clunky to get people to sign up? Would we lose people along the way? And by this time last year, especially with the launch of iOS 17 for Apple, we kind of felt like we were in a moment where we could do it.
Yeah. I suppose a lot of publishers see podcasts as, especially subscription publishers, as a way to maybe sample some of what they do. It's a bit like more of a marketing tool. It's interesting that I suppose the more investment you put in, the more you almost needed to put that value on it.
Yeah, I think so. I think, definitely the better the podcasts get, the more they needed to be kind of integrated into our main business model. I mean, beforehand, I think like a lot of legacy publishers, before the paywall, we were running ads on all the podcasts, which kind of pretty much paid for what we were doing, but it still left podcasts feeling like a bit of an add-on. And so launching the paywall has really been part of a, multi-year process of really integrating podcasts into our journalism.
Were listeners accepting of that when you explained what that reasoning was?
So it was communicating what you're doing is hard, and obviously paying for audio is still not a well-established habit, so that always felt like a real challenge. I suppose the interesting thing from the point of view of The Economist is, traditionally we've not had bylines. Traditionally there is a very strong firewall between editorial and commercial. My job as director of podcasts is to look after the editorial side, but you realize very quickly in this that your sort of strongest lever in persuading listeners to change habits, to do something new, are the podcast hosts. So you're asking Economist journalists to do something new there. So we spent a lot of time thinking about the messaging that was going to go into our podcasts. Obviously, there was a lot of marketing effort elsewhere too. But in terms of how well the listeners responded, I mean, I was nervous, but there was a very key moment a few months before launch where we did some qualitative work. We did some kind of focus group work, if you like, on talking to our listeners. What do they think of this idea? And we had various pitches about all the extra things you'd get with a subscription, but the pitch that really landed very solidly was the central one of good journalism costs money and needs to be supported. And that was a huge relief and very encouraging just for our work and getting out of bed in the morning to know that people appreciate what we do and see the value in it. So it was not at all a huge leap for them actually to start thinking about paying for it.
That's really interesting what you said about the hosts, because I think we see this a bit with newsletters in particular. Some publishers are sort of realising if they put their journalists at the front of a newsletter, it actually plays out really, really well. Is that something that, because that's worked for the podcast, do you think that might play into other aspects of The Economist?
Yeah, and it's Zanny Minton-Beddoes, our editor, has talked about this a lot. I think, it is a journey that for The Economist in general, in the kind of digital world, the absolute strength of The Economist is it has this very strong voice and opinionated voice often that comes from the hive mind, this brilliant expertise that the journalists on the team have. But as media habits evolve, and obviously podcasts being prime among them, but also videos now, we have a great new video stream on our app. People are getting to know the Economist journalists, getting to know what they sound like, what they look like, and I think that's helpful and normal in the environment we're in.
Yeah, it's sort of those personal connections build trust more than maybe the established media brand used to.
For sure, yeah.
Okay, so you're sitting here a year ago. Before you sort of hit that paywall button, were there fears or risks you had when moving to paid podcasts that a year later you're sort of looking back on that maybe have or haven't come to pass?
Yeah, it's definitely scary. It's a bit like, you have an idea to throw a party and then, the night before you think, oh God, what if no one shows up? But, like I say, the research and all the work you've done, you're pretty confident that you're doing the right thing by that stage. And actually very quickly, I came up as a audio producer, radio producer, then podcast producer. As producers, as hosts, you're used to wanting the biggest possible audience for your work. And so that obviously was a big psychological shift. Lots of hosts were like, well, we can paywall some podcasts, but please don't paywall mine. But we quickly got over all those worries, I think, when, once you start seeing people sign up. And bear in mind, this happened at the same time that there was that sort of mass panic in the podcast industry around like Apple changing how they measured downloads. So it came at a great time for us in that everyone was sort of questioning, what is a download really? Like, how many people are there actually out there? So to see the subscribers arriving one by one, almost like, I guess at the beginning, like a party filling up. But I was really struck how you could watch it and it felt more like a sort of stadium filling up. And we were kind of joking as the subscriptions came in. We're like, oh, now we're Brentford. Oh, now we're Spurs. Oh, now we've passed Wembley. You could see as people were linking their accounts. And that's a really powerful feeling because suddenly you've got paying customers. It's not, you're not sort of pumping something random out into the internet and sort of wondering if any of these stats are real. You're actually seeing real paying and engaged customers show up. And that was a very powerful feeling. And quickly it meant those fears amongst producers and hosts evaporated, much more quickly than I thought, actually.
Well, if you can fill Wembley, I think you'll be taking on Taylor Swift next. We said already that you're the first publisher really to do this. Did you have any goals or KPIs in place when you're putting that paywall up, or was it very much like, let's just put it up and see how it goes and see how the audience responds?
That's a great question. So we did have, we had a target to get for listeners in the listeners we wanted in the first 6 months, and we hit that. That was 30,000 that we hit. But I think also we're very conscious that this is really a bet on the longer term, right? To sort of build a bit on that initial pitch of Lara's. We all agree that audio is a bit like print used to be, in that publishers like us made a huge mistake in giving away our journalism for free. And it's taken a while to kind of put the genie back in the box, if that's the right metaphor. And so it's a bet that audio is the same, but that's also something we think is going to change over the next 5 to 10 years. So we also know that we quite likely haven't nailed the strategy in the first iteration. So we did have those KPIs, but I guess we're not kind of straitjacketed by them. And, now we're a year on, we're already thinking about different things we could do. I mean, I would say, speaking honestly, like one of the hardest things to work out is exactly where to put the paywall, because there's obviously many different ways you could do it. In the end, you just have to start doing something and try it and see if it works. So there's still scope to change potentially how we do things. We're very conscious that we won't have nailed it necessarily first time, but we are pleased that we were out there ahead of others, and that hopefully gives us a bit of an edge.
Was that 30,000? Was that 30,000 subscribers, podcast subscribers?
That's new subscribers, yeah. The other sort of key stat for us is, like I say, there was a worry about like, how many people are we going to lose, in terms of listeners. Like I say, as producers, that really is a source of anxiety. But in the end, we've held on to 80% of our audience in terms of numbers. So that was more certainly than I had feared. So that was, that's really reassuring. It is funny having conversations like this, thinking back to a year ago, how this all felt like, such a leap, and now it's sort of completely normalized and we're all getting on with our jobs and enjoying having this much more engaged audience.
I know that The Economist had quite large listener numbers, and it's great to hear that you've retained 80% of them, which possibly mitigates this question, but there must have been a bit of a concern about the impact of advertising on the podcast. I know that the CPMs on podcasts are quite low across the industry, but that would have still been, with the listener numbers, you had quite a significant source of revenue. Was there a fear that if not enough people subscribed, that would really impact the podcast revenue? Or was that like just not your problem?
You've partly, I'm head of podcasts on the editorial side. So partly that decision was out of my hands, I'm relieved to say. But like I say, this is all in the context of an agreement amongst all of us, editorial, commercial, that this is a long-term strategy. This is a bet on the way legacy media and podcasts in general are going. So any kind of bumps in the road in terms of like impact on advertising in the first few months are in that context. And obviously you have fewer listeners, and that's just part and parcel of the strategy. But what you're gaining is engaged subscribers, and that idea of having podcasts as absolutely a central part of our journalism and our subscriber strategy. And I think what's been really gratifying is you could see immediately that you've added, a new tier of subscribers. And I suppose most gratifyingly, the vast majority of those have never paid for an Economist subscription before. And secondly, the vast majority also have never bought an audio subscription before. So in terms of that bet on kind of creating a new behavior, or at least being out ahead of a new behavior in podcast listening, I'm very satisfied that has worked.
Yeah, because I guess you've not got that fear that you're cannibalizing any of the parts of the business, because people wouldn't have had an Economist subscription then like downgrade it because the podcasts were free anyway, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Obviously, you've had a great uptake of the podcast only subscription. Have you seen that there's been people who've thought, do you know what, I might as well just take out a full subscription?
Yeah. So again, this is something that's come up, and not so much on my plate, but on my colleagues. But there is, in terms of like how you iterate this journey that we're on, how the product works. I mean, one of the key things is what options you present subscribers with. You can sort of send them to a sign up page, and that is something that we've tweaked over time, as you'd expect, to see what effect that has. Because we're now offering effectively 2 different tiers of subscribers, and I expect that will be something that we'll keep tweaking with as the strategy evolves.
With the paywall podcast, is there any way for people to sort of come across it and then sign up via the paywall, or is it very much that people have to kind of already be in the Economist's sphere of influence and then get the podcast and kind of download them to their app? Like how does that paid subscription journey look now?
So that's a great question. I mean, I think one of the huge challenges for my colleagues on the product side, was and has been kind of bringing together all the different ways that people will come across us. And it's also interesting to talk to colleagues who don't have a background in podcasts, how challenging that is, because most podcast listening is, off platform, as we say. And that's really odd, right? Most, when you think of, we're used to charging money for our journalism in print and online, and that's in our own ecosystem. Whereas we still, it's mostly via Apple and Spotify that people are coming. So you have to devise different user journeys for each of those platforms. I mean, interestingly, Apple improved that journey at this time last year, which is one of the reasons why we felt like it was a good time to start. But Spotify, the journey is also actually very smooth and intuitive now. One of the sort of interesting knock-on effects of introducing the paywall, though, has been that we are seeing more listening on our own platform, on our own app. We upgraded the listening. We added a podcast tab on our app to coincide with this. We're constantly trying to improve the listener experience on our own platform, and we're very ambitious for what we could do in the future. And I think that I'm confident that will be another of the kind of really long-term benefits of having this strategy is bit by bit. Like I say, the vast majority of listeners are still where you'd expect them to be, Apple and Spotify and other podcast apps. But hopefully, bit by bit, we can sort of get to a point where, we have more people in our own ecosystem, and then we will know a bit more about them. Because the other thing, as I'm sure anyone in podcasting knows, the quality of the data about who's listening is just a real challenge.
It feels like it's 2024 and paid podcasts are still difficult and data is still difficult. Like, how are we still at this point?
Yeah, it is amazing. And like I say, I've been really struck by the conversations I've had with people sort of coming at this from different angles in the business. And it does sort of remind you that for all the amazing things that have happened in podcasting in the last, 5 to 10 years, it started out as this kind of wonderful people in garages, like amateur type medium, which is I think why we all love it, and we try and sort of cling to some of the magic of that. But yeah, the kind of complicated infrastructure is a reminder of it. It is still a bit Wild West.
It is. The intelligence that's still free to listen to, is that still in the long-term plans?
Yeah, there's no plan to change that anytime soon. I mean, the big innovation from a year ago that's worked out really nicely was we introduced, so Intelligence is the daily podcast, Monday to Friday. It's remained in front of the paywall, but we added a 6th episode on a Saturday to coincide with the launch of the paywall called The Weekend Intelligence. And that was really a combination of, we wanted something enticing for subscribers, and also it was a sort of culmination of some of the work we'd done on series like The Prince and Next Year in Moscow, where we knew that our correspondents and our producers had a real talent for finding great stories and telling them in a narrative style, more scripted style podcasts. And we wanted to find an outlet for that would work, on a weekly basis. So we set up The Weekend Intelligence with that in mind, and it's one story kind of richly reported in a narrative style, and that's been a great success. And it's both as something wonderful to listen to, and it's really kind of captivated the minds of journalists, I think, within The Economist, who want to pitch those and find them really satisfying to do. And also it makes that feed kind of interesting because you've got a mixture of free and paid episodes, which is something that we were really keen to experiment with. But I'm really pleased with how that's turned out.
That actually leads really nicely into my next question. Has having the podcast's paywall changed the way that The Economist shows are kind of commissioned or approached when you're looking to create a show?
I mean, the short answer is yes, because, we commissioned 2 things explicitly with the paywall in mind. One was The Weekend Intelligence, which I just spoke about. The other was, it was at that point our 3rd sort of narrative one-off series, limited series, and that was called Boss Class, and it's a podcast about management. I mean, I'm always looking for ideas for where we can sort of make a podcast about something that no one else has really done that well, and we think The Economist can do really well. So China was a great example with The Prince. And then Boss Class was actually, It was Andrew Palmer hosted it. He writes a column on management weekly for the Economist Weekly, and that is pretty consistently our most read column. So that was a quite deliberate commission in a way to say, well, look, we know what our subscribers really like. We think this is an area where we can kind of carve out a space for the Economist in audio. So let's do that for our first subscriber-only series. Yeah, and that did really work well. So the other thing we've done quite deliberately is sort of up the cadence of the special series, as I think of them, the kind of one-off narrative series. And so after Boss Class, we've also had, in time for the Indian election, we had the Modi Raj about Narendra Modi. And then previewing the American election, we had a series called Boom about the baby boomers and how they blew up American politics that came out in the summer, previewing the American election. And that's obviously those series are incredibly intense to make, also very rewarding. And we upped the cadence of those series specifically with the first year of Economist Podcast Plus in mind. So to go back to your original question, I've talked about this with colleagues who face similar dilemmas at other media brands. And yeah, I think it is useful to think of your content in sort of two strands. And I think I certainly intend to be more deliberate about this in the future. Do you have ambassadorial content, as people call it, things that you're sending out in the world to kind of reel new people in? And, and what can you commission that is there to kind of rub the tummies of your core subscribers? And often, there'll be a big overlap between the two, but I think it is useful to think of it in those ways.
I've never ever heard anybody describe their subscribers as like rubbing their tummies. I can't get that out of my head now.
So we had there's a lot of people in the department have small babies at the moment. So
okay.
I just came before doing this podcast. I came from chatting to a colleague about his little one. So that's probably where the baby metaphor is coming from.
Okay. Talking of keeping everybody happy, I know there was quite a good offer on when you launched last year for an annual subscription. That must be coming to retention point now. What sort of things are you looking at in terms of retention indicators, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so again, this is I'm wary of sort of speaking for colleagues, but you're absolutely right that's a key part. That's a key focus for us in these recent weeks. I mean, one of the things that we've done in the last little while is start sending out a newsletter to our subscribers, sort of reminding them or pointing out episodes that were particularly strong that they may have missed. And actually, that was a brilliant idea, which wasn't mine, but it's already been very effective. It's really increased, that engagement aspect that I was talking about earlier. The best thing about this job is reading the inbox. And I think the hosts all feel the same way, and the producers too. And just opening up that channel a bit more, we always encourage people to email in on the shows, but actually sort of doing it in an email and asking people, pointing out episodes they might like, and suddenly the traffic in the inbox has jumped and we're getting lovely messages from people, which I assume are going to turn into repeat subscriptions.
You would hope so. We said at the beginning, it's notable that I don't think anybody so far has really followed your lead on paywalling most of their podcasts. What would your advice be for any publishers that are sitting there maybe thinking about it, either launching a paid podcast or putting their own podcast behind a paywall?
So I get asked this a lot. You won't be surprised to know. I am genuinely grateful for the sort of vision and the bravery of the leadership here at The Economist. Like I say, as someone who just is from a background of I just like making podcasts that sound good and I want people to hear them. This was so it was a brave strategy. So I suppose all that is a way of saying I would encourage people to be bold. At no point have I thought we should have been less bold. Like that boldness has always been rewarded, I think, in this process. I would also, as I hope I've sort of made clear, this is new territory we're staking out. We are experimenting and iterating, right? So, and I think I'm also conscious. We had a lot of deliberations over sort of aspects of the strategy, and I suppose like a lot of things in life, once you make that decision and everyone follows the decision, it's actually hard to keep maintaining that spirit of debate and sort of questioning, are we still doing the same thing? Obviously, we are, and we try to, but I would say, if you think of it, if you sort of go at it with that in mind, that this is going to be sort of version 1 and you're going to iterate, then that's hugely helpful. I mean, communication, obviously, as you mentioned near the start there, I always say, like often with producers, we talk about formats and whether we should do something a bit different this week on this or that podcast. And my sort of standard answer is you can sort of do anything you like as long as you tell the audience what you're doing. And, that's definitely true with doing something different in a format. And I think it's also true sort of strategically, commercially, as long as you make the effort to bring people with you. I mean, I was hugely inspired looking at what other people do, whether it's Blind Boy, with his call out that he puts out in the middle of his episode every week, or Commode and Mayo. Those to me are the real experts at kind of bringing the audience along. And hopefully we can sort of at least get somewhere near that level in terms of bringing people with us, and so far it seems to have worked.
Thank you so much to John Shields for taking the time to speak to us. Now don't forget, we've got a write-up of the key learnings from this interview on voices.media, or you can get that dropped into your inbox every Tuesday if you sign up to the publisher newsletter, also on voices.media. There's a newsletter tab right up the top. This season is sponsored by BlueConic, the operating system that puts data into action for marketing and growth doers. The industry-first solution empowers doers with an unmatched range of capabilities to access relevant customer data, create resonant customer experiences, and drive maximum returns for their business. You can learn more about them at BlueConic.com, where data is for doing. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into the people and products powering publishing's future. Until then, you can keep up with us and all things Media Voices by following us on LinkedIn and subscribing to the publisher newsletter over on voices.media. And if you can share this or tell anybody else about us, we really, really appreciate it. Thanks so much for listening.